Hey everybody, Mel Mah here. Today we are so excited to have Dr. Julie Smith, clinical psychologist, best-selling author, and calm contributor. After nearly a decade running her own private practice, Dr. Julie took to social media in 2019, where her relatable and practical mental health advice quickly resonated with millions. Her debut book, Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before, became the best-selling nonfiction book of 2022. In her newest book, Open When, a companion for life's twists and turns, Dr. Julie offers break in case of emergency advice to help navigate life's challenges. Today, our conversation consisted of dealing with the complexities and hardships of parenthood, talking about how to lean into some of our perfectionist tendencies, and also how to deal with very overwhelming emotions like fear, anger, or guilt. I hope you enjoy our chat, and thanks for being here today. Dr. Julie, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to chat with you about your book and just hear more about your wisdom on all these incredible pieces of advice that you offer in the book.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to meet you.
Before diving in, Dr. Julie, I'd love for you to just share a little bit about the work that you've done, your intention with your first book, as well as this upcoming book, Open When.
So my first book was really filled with kind of instruction and learnings from therapy about things you can do and practice to improve your mental health in the long term. But I found that a lot of people were carrying the book around with them to use in moments of crisis or moments when they were sort of in the eye of the storm and struggling but didn't have anyone to speak to. And I couldn't help but think, I didn't really write it for those moments. I didn't put those words in there. And so I wanted to write something that would be, the words you needed to hear in those moments when, even if you have helpful people in your life, they're not always there at those crucial times when you just need a bit of a pep talk, a bit of a, okay, this is the situation. This is what you need to focus on in order to move through this in the best way. And to have some of that guidance and also some kind of real-time tools, so things that work in the moment to help you get through that moment, rather than you're here and you should have learnt these skills 6 months ago and then you would have been all right, but that's not really so helpful. So I want it to be a bit of guidance for in the moment stuff.
Yeah, I loved that about your book, Open When, about how case specific it is. Like literally, when we get it wrong as a parent, I was like, great, I'm going to open the book up right now. So it gives you that specific, insight into a moment where we maybe just feel tight or we need some guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. So all the different chapters are sort of open when style letters. So each chapter is a different scenario, and they're all really normal human scenarios that we all face at some point, like, when you feel stressed, or when your friends aren't your friends, or when your parents got it wrong, or when you get it wrong as a parent, or these sorts of things that we all go through. But sometimes it helps just to have a good, few words of guidance to, okay, this is the way through.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of reading the book, and I really connected to all the different pieces that you opened up with. In that first section where it talks about when it's hard to be with other people, especially speaking to our parents, whether it's being a parent as well or relating to our parents and trying to learn from maybe the things that we've inherited from them. I'm a new mother myself. I have a 10-month-old baby boy. So I really related to that chapter as a whole, those two sections. So I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit on that, those two sections to start. When it's hard to be with our parents and when it's hard to be a parent ourselves.
Yeah, well, firstly, congratulations on your
Thank you.
your 10-month-old. It's kind of the epicenter of parenting, isn't it? When they're at that kind of age, it's lovely. But yeah, I thought it was really important to include chapters on both of those things. That everybody's parents get it wrong at some point, right? Because there is no way of parenting perfectly, and we're human, and that's how it goes. And then equally, when you become a parent, dealing with your own mistakes and your own sense of what it means to get it wrong and what to do when you get it wrong, can send you into absolute turmoil too. So, and equally, I think when you experience guilt as a parent, when you think, oh, I've dealt with that in a way that I really never intended to, or don't really, that's not the kind of parent I want to be. Um, then it sort of shifts your perspective on your own parents and your experience as a child. And there might be certain things that you want to do differently. But equally, there'll be things, it's important to look back with that kind of balanced view, because there will be things from your own childhood that you'll want to keep, that you value. So you could get someone, I don't know, someone whose parents were perhaps not very affectionate, and perhaps there was a sort of emotional neglect there, and there might be that person therefore might kind of struggle with intimacy as an adult, for example. So they might struggle to cuddle their child as a parent, and yet there might also be things from their childhood that their parents did well. So then they might be able to look back and say, well, actually, I really value that. Despite my parents' difficulties around that, they were always present for me, and they worked really, really hard so that we could have, healthy meals every night, and that they always picked me up from school every day, and were always kind to me, and all of those sorts of things. So there's always a kind of shift in perspective to be had from any of it. But with both of those situations, there's so much raw emotion that can overwhelm us that it can be really hard to get some of that perspective in the moment, when you're kind of in the eye of the storm. So, yeah, I thought it was really important to include those chapters, partly because, yeah, they can be so painful that it just is hard to see the wood for the tree sometimes.
And something you mentioned in your book too, just how we have to go straight into the pain rather than avoid it, right? Because when we avoid the pain or something that we're avoiding, we actually just end up heading straight into it instead of just accepting it and leaning into it, right? Um,
Yeah,
and I think that's exactly what happens with parenting. If we avoid some of the stuff that maybe we found sticky with our relationship and our parents, then it's undoubtedly going to show up in our relationship with our own children because
yeah.
we haven't brought that mindfulness, that awareness to the things that we've been through. And then so we subconsciously just pass it on, right?
Yeah, yeah, and there'll be certain things that when you become aware of the sort of the patterns that have developed through your own childhood experiences, even when you work on that, say even in therapy or not in therapy, you might do it by yourself, but because those patterns are so ingrained, they've taken your whole life to develop. There will be times when, even with the greatest insight, you will go around that cycle again. And there'll be times when you can break it and do something different, and that's okay. It's not about, you know, by the time you have your child being so kind of healed and wonderful that nothing ever goes wrong or nothing ever happens that fills you with kind of parent guilt. It's about then looking at that with perspective, being able to deal with the emotion that comes up, repair any damage that's done, and move on in a kind of really positive way.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And the one word I really remember from your chapter when you get it wrong as a parent is you talk about self loathing and doing your best not to move into that place because the self loathing is what creates the guilt, right? Can you just speak a little bit to that for our audience and for people listening? Just how you can how we can deal with that, how we can gently lean into that if we do experience that emotion within us.
Yeah, I think something about parenting is that you can get better with time and effort. So, you don't start day one being the best parent you're ever going to be. As the different challenges come up with each new chapter, you face those, you learn something, and you build on that. And so they're in a process of becoming, but so are you as the parent. And if when mistakes or failures happen, you then respond to that with self-loathing, self-hatred, kicking yourself while you're down, then you create shame, intense amounts of shame that mean it's impossible to learn. So you're not set up to be able to kind of take learning from an experience if you're kind of battling with your own self-worth. So we have to kind of uh, sort of reevaluate our relationship with failure, even within parenting. And it's really difficult to do that because it's a shame minefield that's kind of perpetuated really by, different sort of parenting books or parenting gurus that say, it's this way or the highway. And if you break this rule or you do that, you were going to create sort of damage in your children forever. And which means that sometimes then people get a sense of, oh gosh, if I make this mistake, then I'm just no good as a parent, and and everything shuts down, and you just become, you're in your own turmoil then, and you can't really be a parent when you're in that place either. So you then just create huge amounts of painful and destructive emotion that are really hard to come back from, so that you can return to building on your relationship with your child. So yeah, I'm all for parents being a bit more realistic with each other. And I think the way that we do that is by getting real with other parents, so talking honestly and openly about the ups and downs of parenting and the hardships and the great bits with other parents. And when you start to do that, you kind of you just see them do the same. They come back with, oh, me too, oh, that happened to me, or I find this bit difficult. And and so that sort of connection with other people is really the antidote to all of that kind of shame for not following the rules of whatever book you've picked up that tells you how apparently you should do things.
Totally. It reminds me of this word that I work on a lot with my students and the women that I coach, which is perfectionism. And which is why I think, especially for new moms, it's another thing that we can try to be a perfectionist at, right? When truly, from what you're saying and from what I'm learning on my own, is that the more we allow ourselves to be imperfect and the more we can be vulnerable with how real and how difficult parenting is, the better we can actually be as parents, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I sort of, my having a daughter helps me to uh, see perfectionism for what it is, because if I try to do everything perfectly, be the perfect mom, and you know have a decent career, and have everything right all of the time, what I'm really doing is creating that template for her and those expectations for her, when to me she's worthy whether she gets all of that right or not. And if I'm willing to kind of be destructive towards my own health and my own mental health in order to kind of make a show that I've got everything right, then I'm essentially teaching her that same destructive pattern, which I would never want to do. So I think sometimes that's really helpful with working with parents, is you have such unconditional love for your child that their self-worth is never on the table for you. It's never negotiable, right? So, you know, whatever they excel in or find difficult won't affect how much you love and care for them. And so we have to kind of turn that on our relationship with ourselves, because they won't do what we say, they'll do what we do. So the more that you are, displaying, it's okay not to be perfect, it's okay not to look perfect, it's okay for the house not to look perfect, it's okay to excel in some areas and not in others, and all of those things is creates a much more human. It's the antidote to anxiety, really, isn't it? Creates a much more
Yeah.
human family base.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I think too, what I wish maybe I'd gotten from my parents, or I guess maybe where my parents got it wrong, was that vulnerability, wanting to see that more, wanting to see my parents say that it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay not to get straight A's and not to have all your ducks in a row, or to be a little bit late sometimes, because in that messiness, there's so much beauty and magic and creativity too, right? And if we're just trying to teach our kids to be in these boxes, then that's going to create this rigidity, and the opposite of fluidity and just being able to enjoy life, right? Another piece that I wanted to bring up was you were talking about how important repair is in moments where you might not act in the way that you want as a parent. So yeah, talk a little bit about that. And I'm wondering if you have like a personal example with your daughter on where you've applied that tool of, instead of trying or instead of ruminating or moving towards the direction of self-loathing, really finding that mindfulness to repair and to be vulnerable and to connect with your child instead.
Yeah, and I think this has been a sort of an area of debate for a long time about whether you just need authority as a parent, and therefore does apologizing compromise that authority, and then there's sort of the other side where if you apologize for every every time you feel guilt as a parent, if you then apologize, you'd be always apologizing, right? So, and that wouldn't be helpful either. But you can apologize when it's appropriate and helps to reconnect with your child. So if you've I don't know, let's say you've kind of laid down a rule, but in the process things have got heated and you've got really angry and you've shouted in a way that you're not proud of, or that's hurt your child or upset them, and but the rule still stands, then it's okay to separate the two. So you can say, I apologize for losing my cool and shouting. That wasn't very nice. And I'm going to work on that. I'm going to try and do better next time. But this boundary and this rule still stands. And here's the reason why. And then you're almost, because you've allowed the anger to pass and calm down anyway, you're in a much better place to be able to communicate clearly and be listened to at the same time. So apology is good when it helps you to reconnect with your child, and but then it also has to be followed by kind of action. So um,
Hmm.
apologies that aren't coupled with genuine effort to try and do better in that area, they start to lose their meaning after a while. And so when you're apologizing or not apologizing, it's being aware of what you're teaching your child at that time. So if you're apologizing all the time for every little thing, um, then that's probably teaching that child something unhelpful too. But equally, if you can never apologize because it feels uncomfortable, that's teaching them something about apology as well. So it's always being aware of what they're taking from it, and what the impact would be on your relationship. I know Dr. Becky Goodman, actually, a clinical psychologist in the States, always says about how it would feel and how it would impact on your relationship with your parents if they recognized something that they had done that had hurt you at some point and apologize for it, and getting people to think about how would that feel and how would that impact on your closeness with your parent. And usually it's quite an emotional thing to really kind of think about on a personal
Hmm.
level, and that's because it would bring you closer together to a degree. And so there is value in that, but it's always got to be age appropriate and lead to something kind of positive on the next step ahead.
Of course. The key word that stuck out to me when you were speaking is that word teaching, right? Because just an empty apology of just, oh, I'm sorry, that's not really teaching a child anything. But when you can be brave enough with your emotions and vulnerable to explain, because I feel like when I grew up, I just got a hard no. And in ways that was beneficial, like I had that very authoritative parenting where I understood the rules and the structure, but then having that fluidity and emotion to
Yeah,
understand why and to see, okay, yes, I understand the authority of it and why it's a hard no, but why, like what is the reasoning behind it, that I think establishes such a greater bond and relationship between parent and child and empowers the child too to feel like, oh, I'm worthy of understanding why. Okay, got it,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And sometimes that fits and the child is able to understand why, and sometimes they're just not. Maybe developmentally they're not
Right.
there yet, and we're making one of them is conversations I've had with my daughter about why she can't have social media yet, um, and suggesting that I'm trying to get her to understand something that she can't understand until she's much older, and you can't know it until you know it. And so, well, and I'm glad that she doesn't really have any idea of what I'm trying to protect her from, because then I wouldn't have protected her from it. So, those kind of things where sometimes that's just got to be, at some level of explanation, but generally just a hard no. And at other times when they're developmentally in a place where they're able to understand it, then we can kind of spend more time on that. But like you say, there is something to be said for that clear authority of actually, what the parent says goes, and trust that we're trying to do our best by you and we're trying to protect you.
Yes, 100%. I mean, all these things that we teach our children or that we've learned from our parents, it all just gets embedded into our subconscious and it plays out in our behaviors, whether we're aware of it or not, right? Which is sometimes why it feels so daunting as a parent to realize that that's everything you say and do is really being absorbed by this little human. And it takes me to our next section that I want to chat about of just when it's hard to be with yourself. And speaking specifically to that inner critic that we all have, we touched on perfectionism earlier and how that really is tied in with this inner critic that we have. But yeah, I wanted you to speak a little bit on that and maybe, for yourself, what tools you've learned and that you share in the book around how to mitigate that inner critic and how to gently embrace that part of ourselves.
Yeah, I think a lot of people I've worked with over the years in therapy will often start off that kind of work trying to hold on to that inner critic. So, especially if people have been high achievers, there is an assumption that is that sort of inner, I say inner critic, it's more like a sort of inner bully, isn't it? That has somehow given them the drive and determination to succeed, and that without it, they genuinely feel afraid of losing that drive and of not sort of having that sort of energy to set goals and reach them and that kind of thing, as if that equates with discipline. And it's just not the case. When uh, we can access a sense of drive from a place of enough. So from a place of, yeah, I can be critical of myself in a constructive way, but my self-worth is never negotiating. My self-worth is never on the table to be negotiated. So I am, worthy as a human being, and the sort of the tendency to then be self-critical is really about um, doing that in the most helpful way. So there's certain, something I go into in the book is how to be critical uh, in a way that's going to help you rather than hinder you. So if you're, doing the global attack of your character as a person, you perhaps, I don't know, made some small mistake and you are, just filled with hate for yourself, that you think you're a bad person, or even if you kind of, let's say you fail at a test or something, I'm a loser, I'm never going to amount to anything, I'm, you know, not worthy, all of those kind of things, that makes a sort of global attack on you as a person that's really hard to come back from, because how can you change who you are as a, you're sort of the core of who you are as a person. But if you are critical of yourself in a very specific, concrete way that's closely related to your goals, so okay, that test didn't go well. Let's look at why. Let's break it down. Where was I struggling? Did I, put in enough preparation, or, where could I get support from? All of these sorts of things. That sort of process that's very specific, very goal orientated and productive can actually help you and move you forward. So it's not about being dishonest with yourself and saying you're just wonderful as you are, you never need to improve and you never need to change. It's saying, yes, improvement is possible with effort and with someone who has your back and someone who has your best interests at heart. And I often go with the sort of analogy of a sports coach. If you think of any elite athlete, they all have a coach, but they don't go and choose their high school bully to be their coach, right? Because that kind of, verbal battering doesn't work when you want to achieve high things. They choose someone that they trust to be honest with them, but also to do that in a supportive way. They trust that that person wants them to reach their potential, and will support them when they're down and support them when they're up. And that we have to take that kind of relationship and apply that to ourselves, so that we're not we don't always have a coach with us. So um, then we can kind of apply that to how we respond to ourselves in the face of, be it failure or just simple mistakes, or sometimes not even that. Sometimes it's doing well, but that kind of inner voice would say, well, it's not well enough. It's sort of 99%, where's the other percent? And yeah, so I think that's a really nice analogy that always helped me to kind of think about how am I speaking to myself in a way that's actually going to help me, rather than hinder me.
Beautifully said. Yeah, I think often, when we recognize, maybe a more negative trait within us, like an inner critic, the choice is to not create balance, but to just drop a coach completely. Instead of replacing the bully with sports coach, we just say, no more teachers. We don't want to look at ourselves anymore. We're just going to not
Yeah.
say anything. But it's finding that middle ground. And this was also a piece in your book that really struck me when you were talking about comparing ourselves to others. It's the same thing about how we can be strategic about how we're comparing ourselves to others.
Yeah.
I grew up as a dancer, so I was always compared to other people in auditions, just looking in the mirror. And sometimes the thinking around that, around trying to heal that when you notice it, is to say, okay, I should never look at anybody else. But when I look back on those dancing years, I actually see how comparing myself in a strategic and constructive way was actually the thing that helped me. Was like, oh, I
Yeah.
really like the way she's doing that. Or maybe another word for comparison is, or comparing is feeling inspired by them and saying, oh, maybe I should try it the way that person's doing it. So yeah, it's what you're talking about, strategically looking at ourselves, strategically looking at other people, and doing that from a place of balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It works with the comparison stuff. So a lot of people will, especially if there's underlying core beliefs about sort of not being enough, then what we tend to do is compare ourselves in a way that, and we choose comparisons that reconfirm that belief, even if it's a destructive belief. But actually, when you, rather than the just stop comparing yourself, which is impossible to do because we're human beings and we're built to be assessing how we're measuring up in our social group, that's a survival response. But if we feel that kind of strike of envy, then you can turn that into inspiration in the way that you did with the dancing. You look at someone who is maybe a few steps ahead of you in terms of experience and expertise, and you pick something that you specifically like about what they do and how they do it. And then you can turn that envy into the inspiration for, how am I going to get to that? And what is it they do and how do they do it? So that kind of comparison becomes an action plan that puts you on the front foot, ready to improve. And I think what has to come with it is a growth mindset, the sense of, my abilities and my talents are not fixed. I can improve with effort. And so a decent comparison is a sort of springboard for a well-directed bit of effort towards improving and sort of reaching your own potential.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, in this world right now where it feels like we're always being compared, just even through social media and how connected we all are, that is the goal to get there. But I'm curious if you have any advice for our listeners on how to get there. Like, what are maybe some practical tools or ways that people can build that real confidence within themselves to then say, okay, I can look to others for inspiration, not as a way of, demeaning myself or lowering my self worth.
Yeah, I think with the whole sort of area of building confidence in yourself, I think one of the biggest misconceptions around that is that some people are born confident and some people aren't, that it's some sort of personality trait and something in you. And it's really a byproduct out of a way of living. So, if you are willing to go into a situation where you're the beginner or you're not the best and you're learning and you're going to mess up and you're going to fail occasionally, but you're also going to learn, then you will keep going back into that situation and tolerating the missteps and the failures. And in doing that, you learn from the failures, because you learn that I can survive these and tolerate them and learn from them and move on. And you learn from the successes and how to deal with those too. And because they are a challenge also at times. And then by spending time in that area where you once didn't feel confident, building up all of those experiences of success and failure, the byproduct of that is a growing confidence in, I know I can deal with this situation whether it goes well or not because I've done it before. Our brains learn from evidence of doing. So you can't really think yourself into being super confident. It's very situation specific. So yeah, so the first time that I was assessed in my clinical training, I was sat in front of a patient, I was assessing them, and my supervisor was sat in the room watching me and assessing me. And I remember thinking, this is awful. What am I doing? Like, I hate this kind of situation. I hate being watched. I hate, having these kind of conversations. And that was the first one. But now if you ask me to do an assessment, I would enjoy it, and I would know what I was doing, and I would bring a confidence. But that's only because I've done, I don't know if it's hundreds or thousands of assessments over the, time that I've been a psychologist. But your confidence grows with each experience. Some of the experiences are
Mm.
good, some of them are more challenging, and but they all add to the confidence. Whereas, put me in a dance studio and you would know exactly what to do, and I would be petrified. So, it's just experience, right?
Exactly. Confidence is like a muscle. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like we also go through phases where, it's not this constant thing where we're like, oh, I've learned how to be confident. Now I just stay here all the time, right?
Mm,
You have moments where that muscle feels a lot stronger and then moments where that muscle feels a bit weaker.
yeah.
There's a quote that I wrote down. I loved the way you described this habituation, where you say in your book, habituation is the process by which your brain will downshift the stress reaction in response to repeated exposure. And so, in this situation, the stress reaction might be, ooh, feeling awkward or not feeling confident or feeling super critical. But knowing that the more we repeat something over and over again, the brain literally downshifts from that response, right? And then creates a different response, a calmer response, just like you experienced with your assessments.
Yeah, and a lot of people, especially online, talk about a lack of confidence as if it's a mental health problem, and it's a normal
Mm,
part of being human, especially
yes.
earlier in life. So, that stress response that we get in any situation that's new, that's unpredictable, or where, demands are placed on us, or where we feel unprepared, or, where we don't yet know really what we're doing, then we will have a stress response in that situation, and we'll feel anxious, we won't feel confident. But that's expected. That's your brain working at its best to protect you, because if you didn't have that stress response, then your alert level wouldn't be increased, so to enable you to deal with it. So, we have to kind of learn to have a new relationship with that stress response, where we say, okay,
Mm.
thank you, brain, you're helping me out here, this is new. Eh, Given that stress, what can I do to shift this experience? So maybe I do need to prepare more, or maybe I just need to take that with me for the first time, knowing that I will look after myself if it doesn't go well. And then when you're willing to be in that vulnerable position, and you're willing to be not confident, or in the place where you don't feel confident, then it will come later on. But it's not something
Mm.
you could aim for and arrive at. You just do the things that are important to you, even when they're difficult, and you'll look up at some point and go, "Oh, this feels kind of easier than it used to."
I find you honestly, it's not like you have a moment where when you've been confident, but then you kind of are like, wait, when did I all of a sudden stop feeling less confident? You're just a little more, things are a little bit easier, or you feel a little bit stronger in your voice. Um, and that's the beautiful thing, is we don't have to know those things. We can just continually learn about ourselves and work on these things and trust that they're naturally going to happen and take hold. The final part of our book that I wanted to spend talking about is called When It's Hard to Be with Your Feelings. And we know, everybody listening knows, that at some point in our lives, we all go through really challenging emotions, whether it's fear, grief, guilt, or anger. I'd love for you to share some of the most important strategies that you offer for dealing with some of these overwhelming emotions.
Yeah, so again, I think there's some normalizing to kind of be done when it comes to overwhelming emotion, and partly because of how it's often talked about on social media as um, something that's wrong with you, that you shouldn't have strong emotion if everything is okay, and that's not true. All the different emotions are a normal part of being human, and um, And emotions have something to say, so they're information. So your brain is constantly taking in information from both the outside world and also inside your body. So your breathing, your heart rate, your blood pressure, things like that, to get a sense of how things are and how you are. And when it gets a sense that, so for example, fear, if it gets a sense that not all is well, that something might be a threat to you, then it will trigger a fear response. Or if you feel backed into a corner and under threat, you might have an anger response. But whatever different type of emotion comes out is the result of your brain making an assessment with all the information from your senses, from the outside world, or from inside your body. It's your brain's job to come up with some kind of summary of that and some sense of meaning around how you should feel about it and what you should do about it. And part of that communication is emotion. But it's kind of like a smoke alarm. So it only has so much information to go on. So your brain can't get it right every time. Just like a smoke alarm, it can go off when there's a fire, but it can also go off when someone's making the toast, right? So it's our job when we feel an emotion, it's our job to work out whether it's something that we need to act on or whether it's something we can focus on calming the nervous system and then
Mm.
moving on from. But if we see emotion as somehow kind of pathological or a sign that something is wrong with us, then what we do is we try
Mm.
to get rid of it and we try to pretend it's not there. Um, or we try to numb it, maybe with food or alcohol or whatever it is, whatever that choice of numbing is. We'll do that to kind of make it go away, but then we haven't listened to what it was trying to tell us. So yeah, you've got this kind of smoke alarm kind of idea where your brain doesn't have all the information, but it's doing its best to give you a sense of what's going on around you and what you
Mhm.
should do about it. But it doesn't have all the information, and so you have to then use that as, or when you experience an emotion, then seeing it as one possible perspective. So you might in a certain scenario feel angry about something, and then once you have a few minutes to consider it, you realize maybe some of that anger is a bit unwarranted, and maybe you were being a bit sensitive because maybe you didn't have a great night's sleep, for example.
Yeah, you said some really insightful things just about how emotions are like it's like the smoke alarm, right?
Yeah,
Or something my teachers would always say as well is that emotions are messages from that very deep part of yourself. So, there's definitely positive and negative emotions, but maybe not bad or good, right?
yeah,
Because even the more negative ones or the more challenging ones can be very beneficial to our growth and be leading us more in the direction that we need to be going in. The other thing that I always hold on to that one of my teachers said is that fear can either stand for forget everything and run, which is the pushing down, which is, believing that something's wrong with us, or it could also stand for face everything and rise. So when we choose to gently embrace our emotions and move towards them, even if they're really difficult, that's actually the thing that allows us to grow and evolve.
yeah, absolutely. I love that kind of idea. It's either kind of front foot or back foot. I'm either the rabbit in the headlights, or I'm the predator going for it. And um, I think that idea really helps with fear. I think with other emotions, it can be about sitting with it as well. And just,
Mhm.
some emotions are so uncomfortable that um, the challenge becomes to tolerate them and just be with them. And recognizing that they are temporary, even though they're really uncomfortable. And so if you sit with it, it will actually come back down again and you will bring yourself back to calm. So sometimes it's about soothing yourself through an uncomfortable feeling, to recognize that you don't have to run from it. It will pass, and it will, even if it keeps being re-triggered and coming back. Each emotion is a temporary experience, so it won't last forever.
Yes. I mean, everything is temporary, right? We live in this impermanent world, and to try to hold on to something that is constantly shifting, like an emotion, is just illusion. That's what we really talk about in mindfulness: is that power of discernment, to discern and to know what is true. So to know that your emotions shift, they change. You're not stuck in this forever. Um, but to close off, I'd love for you to maybe give one piece of advice to someone who's feeling really stuck. So for, maybe someone who's out there who's really stuck in a very overwhelming emotion and doesn't know how to move forward, what advice could you give to them?
Um, I think sometimes when you're feeling stuck, it might be in some kind of pattern. And firstly, I guess the recognition that you are stuck is sometimes the hardest part, right? So, recognizing that you're stuck is great because a lot of people stay stuck for a long time without noticing it. The next big challenge is acknowledging your own sense of agency in your ability to break free from it. Um, the process is not necessarily easy or short and quick. Sometimes it can take a long time to work out what that cycle is and what you're doing to contribute to it. So, what you're doing to keep yourself going around that cycle, whatever it is. Um, and you really do need that sense of agency, um, and acknowledgement of your own responsibility. A bit like the kind of parenting thing. There might be cycles that we're in with our own parents, but until we recognize our part in that and what we're contributing to those patterns, then we kind of feel that we have no power to change it. So sometimes it's, what we do in therapy is we formulate. So we pretty much just pen and paper, we map out those cycles. Okay, this happens, then I do that and wish I hadn't. And then I do that, and then I'm back round again. And so we just map out the kind of cycle, and the details may change each time, but the general gist of it is the same. And so once you map that out and you recognize how you got here, and that cycle goes round and round, then you recognize it in the moment when it's happening, and you get to decide in those moments. You go, oh, I know where I am on the cycle. I know what I'm doing. I can now exit and do something different, or I can go around again. And it's just by opening that window um, of acknowledgement and recognition of where you are that opens that window for choice as well. So yeah, just that moment of um, recognition of, okay, I'm in the cycle and I know which bit comes next because I've already mapped it out. It creates the opportunity for change. It just gives you that tiny little moment in which you can choose to do something different rather than, acting on impulse and going around the cycle again.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah, the awareness of where you're at, the awareness of our cycles and our patterns, that is the medicine to move forward, right?
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of how in like a horror movie or a scary movie, when you don't see something, it's a lot scarier. But then finally, when you see the monster or you're aware of it, you're like, oh, that's what I was scared of. And it kind of dissolves a lot of that tension. And it's kind of like the monsters within us too, like being willing to look them straight in the face instead of keeping them hidden, which actually builds so much more tension around it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Julie. This was such a beautiful conversation, and I really appreciate you sharing all your wisdom with us. I know your book, Open When, is going to be such a hit and make such a massive impact on people everywhere. So thank you so much for joining us today.